Okay, I'm going to talk about the next gen. And no, I don't mean Chris Eubank Jr., I mean the next generation of heavyweights. And there's a couple of guys on this list who are kind of on the borderline, meaning you could class them as next generation heavyweights, but you could also class them as current generation heavyweights due to their age, when they turn pro, the fact they've had relatively few fights, etc. But we'll come on to them a little bit later on. We'll start off with the youngest on the list, which is Jared Anderson, the American heavyweight prospect or even contender in the eyes of some people now. 12-0, 12 KOs. As I say, 23 years of age, 6'4", 78.5-inch reach from Toledo, Ohio, USA. He, over this weekend, beat Jerry Forrest in 2 rounds. That was a very good result. In fact, it's not showing the result here. Let me just refresh it a second. Yep. So he stopped Jerry Forrest in 2 rounds with a TKO. That, going in, was an interesting matchup because Jared Anderson really hadn't fought anybody who had been on the kind of form that Jerry Forrest has been on of late, such as a draw with Michael Hunter and a draw with Zhilei Zhang, the big Chinese heavyweight. Now, Anderson went in there against Jerry Forrest, and he did what I call fighting a young man fight. I've spoken about this in recent videos. An old veteran, and Jerry Forrest I don't think is that old, but he's certainly a lot older than Jared Anderson. A veteran likes to slow the pace down. They like to old man you, do these old man tricks, slow the pace down, mess you around, hit you with shots you don't expect, and then again, back to the same methodical pace. Jared Anderson got clipped early on in the fight with a couple real good left hands from Jerry Forrest, and obviously questions have to be raised about Jared Anderson's defense because this is not the first time he's got clipped like that. He got clipped a few times against Jerry Forrest, but then he went into overdrive. He got angry and he set about Jerry Forrest and threw, I think it was 114 punches in the first round. Crazy, right? So he obviously has a lot of confidence in his stamina to be throwing that many punches. Remember, this bout was scheduled for 10 rounds. He's throwing 114 punches in the first. Okay, so yeah, you could say that the guy's hot-headed, reckless abandon, running red lights, as Dwyer likes to say. But that has to come from a feeling of confidence in his stamina. That's what he did. And of course, when you're young, when you're just 23 years of age, you tend to have more energy. You tend to have more, just more gas in the tank than you do when you're 33 or 43, right? So that youth and the confidence in his stamina allowed Jared Anderson to do what Zhilei Zhang and Michael Hunter couldn't do, which was just overwhelm Jerry Forrest. There was no knockdowns actually in the fight, but he just got him in the corner in the second round, started wailing away again, hit him with a right hand, basically knocked him out on his feet. So here's me doing a post-fight review. But Jared Anderson is a very athletic heavyweight. We know that he's been a sparring partner for Tyson Fury, and he said recently he wants to move away from that and now become a contender in his own right rather than a sparring partner for Fury. Yeah, he's athletic. He is a big man. I mean, not as big as the real big heavyweights in the division today, but 6'4" is still a big man. 240 pounds, there or thereabouts. A similar size, actually, to Daniel Dubois. Dubois is about half an inch taller, but in terms of weight, they're about the same. Anderson is so much more fluid. We'll come on to Dubois in a moment. Anderson is so much more fluid. He moves literally like a middleweight or a light heavyweight. That's the way he moves, even though he's a 240-pound, 6'4" heavyweight. I think he's got tremendous potential. He's obviously a very, very confident character, and confidence, as I've said many times, takes you a long way in the sport of boxing and a long way in life. Confidence can make up for so many deficiencies. So I think there's a lot of promise here with Jared Anderson, with the confidence, the athleticism, the speed, the punching power. Now, we can compare, I think, the punching power of Anderson to, let's say, the punching power of Zhilei Zhang. Zhang had Jerry Forrest on the floor a number of times. He didn't really have to try that hard to drop the guy. So I think it's fair to say Zhilei Zhang hits harder than Jared Anderson. I don't think Jared Anderson is the hardest puncher in the division, at least not now. Perhaps as he goes on through his 20s, we'll see that power increase maybe, as he gets more man strength, excuse me. Because, if you've got the technique and you've got the speed, you combine that with extra strength, and I'm talking about natural strength as you fill out, as you get older, you can start hitting harder, right? So, yeah, Anderson, a work in progress for sure. You don't want to be getting clipped as clean as he was against Jerry Forrest, because there are certain guys out there whose shots are going to affect you. Forrest's shots didn't seem to affect him in terms of any concussive damage or anything like that. But yeah, there are going to be guys who hit you like that and they're going to hurt you. So Anderson needs to tighten that defense up. He does lean back from punches. And this is not the 1960s where being 6'4" was considered a giant. Back then, Muhammad Ali could lean back from shots and avoid most people's punches. Wouldn't pay for leaning back. He did a few times. Henry Cooper dropped him prior to the Sonny Liston fight, and another guy. But for the most part, he got away with the leaning back. But in this day and age, the heavyweights are much, much bigger. 6'4" is kind of a medium-sized heavyweight by today's standards. So maybe that's something that Jared Anderson and his trainer are going to look at in future, or perhaps he'll change the trainer in future, is the whole leaning back thing. I'm not sure that's a good idea all the time, because he does keep getting clipped by these guys. But, it is what it is. He's very confident. He believes in himself. And I'm not saying that Jerry Forrest is a massive puncher, but he caught Jared Anderson pretty clean. Nothing happened. So far, Anderson has passed the chin test as well. He is considered, I think, the best heavyweight prospect in the US right now, and I think for good reason. Let me know what you guys think of Jared Anderson in the comment section below. Do you, like me, believe that he will go on to be one of the top heavyweights in the division in the not too distant future? He's looking to push on in 2023 and actually challenge for world honors. He's only 13-0. But I like the ambition of a young guy like this, wanting to be let off the leash, wanting to go up there and, do this, that, and the other. In terms of his amateur background, it loads here. So he did fight internationally, as you can see. Fought in Bulgaria there. Fought in Holland there. Fought in Germany there. That was in the Youth Cup tournament quarterfinal. USA Eastern Regional Youth Open final. So, he's fought in tournaments. Certainly hasn't been in the Olympics or anything like that. So he wasn't, let's say, you've got the Junior Olympics, yes, but not the Senior Olympics, which is the big one. And yeah, he hasn't really got the kind of, interesting, he did fight Richard Torres Jr., who I'm going to come on to. And he lost that fight back in 2017 on a unanimous decision over 3 rounds. So, yeah, he doesn't have the high-level amateur achievements that some of the other guys on this list do. And maybe that will show up as his career progresses and he starts to actually fight some of his fellow, let's just say, next generation heavyweights. Anyway, moving on from Jared Anderson, we've got Richard Torres. Now, he is 4-0. Anderson, where are we at? Pro Box. 13-0, 13 KOs. Turned pro, should have mentioned that, 2019. In, where are we at? October 2019. Richard Torres, who beat him in the amateurs. Again, 23 years of age, both young guys. 4-0. Only just turned pro earlier on this year. He was in the Olympics, where he lost to Bakatir Jalalov, another person on this list, on points. But he'd previously, I think in the World Championships, been knocked out badly by Jalalov. And that was a controversial fight. I'll come on to why that was a little bit later on. Now, Torres is, another thing I should have mentioned about Anderson. Anderson is a switch hitter. So he'll fight southpaw and orthodox, switch between the two, whereas Richard Torres is a dedicated southpaw. He's got pretty fast hands, seems like a pretty good puncher, does have that amateur background. We go on his amateur record here. Again, there's the loss to Jalalov in the Olympic final in Japan last year. he's had lots of amateur fights, of course, fought all around the world. I'm looking for the other Jalolov fight. Yeah, there you go. First round knockout loss to Jalolov in 2019, and that was a real brutal knockout loss. As I say, controversial. But he's beaten lots of other people, top amateurs from all over the world, extensive amateur background. Certainly by modern standards, he's a relatively small heavyweight. Go back to his pro record. Only 6'2" against Southpaw. And as you can see, the weight here, turned pro at 228 pounds, 224, 225, 229. In English money, this is just over 16 stone. Right, so this is a relatively small heavyweight by today's standards, but he is quick hands, quick feet, seems to punch well. And I don't know whether he was raised on Rocky movies or whether he just likes the 1980s in general, but whenever you look at Richard Torres Jr.'s training footage, he's always dressed in like these cropped t-shirts and stuff like that, which I think Sylvester Stallone wore in some of the Rocky movies, and you'd see some fighters in the 80s wearing those kind of t-shirts. And yeah, you see some of the training footage and he's got 80s music playing, which sounds like it could have been in the Rocky montage, etc., which I quite like, as somebody who grew up in the 1980s. I like the nostalgia of all that. So yeah, Richard Torres Jr., let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe my perception is a bit off here, but he isn't getting as much fanfare as Jared Anderson at the moment. Maybe it's just due to the fact that he hasn't been professional as long, but there seems to be a lot more people talking about Anderson than talking about Richard Torres Jr. But of course, as he progresses in his career and starts beating some more notable names, at the moment he's just fighting journeyman, then I'm sure people will start mentioning him a lot more often. Moving on to the next fighter on the list, Daniel Dubois. Now, of course, we know quite a lot about him now. 19-1, 18 KOs, big puncher. I've compared him to Frank Bruno in the past. I think he's the most similar fighter in the heavyweight division right now to a young Frank Bruno. Fights in a similar way, stiff and upright, but very heavy-handed. And punch with both hands. Also, like Bruno, has a solid jab. I would say at this stage, is his jab as good as Bruno's jab? Because Bruno had a real good jab. I mean, that's what gave Lennox Lewis so many problems when they fought, was Frank Bruno's real ramrod jab. But, whoever's jab you think is the best out of Dubois and Bruno, Dubois still got a good jab. Now, there were some people kind of debating with me on my recent post-fight video when Dubois fought Kevin Lerena about the knockdowns. There were some people who believed that Dubois wasn't hurt, or they seemed to believe this, that Dubois wasn't hurt and he just suffered a knee injury. I certainly don't buy that. If you're trying to tell me that he got hurt off the first, off the left hand that caught him high on the head, and then in the course of being on wobbly legs, he somehow hurt his knee or hurt his ankle, I mean, maybe that can happen. But if you're trying to tell me that he didn't get hurt at all, and that even the first knockdown was purely down to an injury, yeah, I don't buy that. And even the notion that, he got hurt, maybe misstepped and hurt a knee, and that caused the first knockdown, even that notion I'm not 100% sold on. I would, if I'm going to be 100% sold on it, I want to see the scans. Truthfully, they don't have to put them out. Obviously, that's confidential medical information. That's okay. But for me to be convinced, I need to see them. Because when I was talking to somebody in the comments who seemed to think, no, it was just an injury. There was, Dubois wasn't hurt. I said to the guy, well, Dubois never claimed an injury after the fight. If he has any kind of injury, of ACL, whatever it is, that would be painful. And Dubois said there was no pain. All right. And if you want to basically, how can I explain it? If you're looking to try and cover up the fact, like let's say you're his training team or Dubois himself, if you're looking to cover up the fact that he got hurt, you could blame it on an injury, right? That's what you would do. Dubois didn't do that in the post-fight interview. He said, oh, there was no pain and it was weird and this, that, and the other, right? So, that is what that is. As far as I'm concerned, he did get hurt from that left hand from Kevin Lerena. And if you go and watch, as I mentioned in that video, the fight he had against Richard Latte, go to the second round of that fight. I'll leave a link in the description to the second round of that fight. I'll tell you the time you need to go to on that video. I'll do all the work for you. Go watch it. Gets hit by a right hand by Richard Latte, and his back leg goes. Exactly the same as we saw against Kevin Lerena. And I'm sure we're going to see that back leg go again. Now, I'm not writing Daniel Dubois off here. Okay? It's heavyweight boxing. You get clipped, your leg can go. It's not the end of the world. But again, just with the same as with Jared Anderson, getting clipped that clean, that early is not a good sign from a defensive perspective. Obviously, Anderson hasn't had as many fights as Daniel Dubois, hasn't fought the same level of opposition, right? But still, Daniel Dubois getting clipped as early as he is, he stands up straight. There's very little upper body movement there. And there are going to be many other people who can catch him. So that's something I think he needs to work on. As I say, 25 years of age now, Daniel Dubois. Orthodox 6'5" or 6'4.5", some people say. 78-inch reach, good jab, power in both hands. He's got that loss to Joe Joyce. That was back in 2020, where he took a knee and didn't get back up. Since then, he's strung together some wins. Bogdan Dinu Kusumano, I think you pronounce that. Trevor Bryan, of course, and Kevin Lerena. He's WBA regular champion right now, and he'll be looking to push on and try and challenge whoever holds the WBA proper belt, right, the main belt, in 2023, 2024. So yeah, I'm certainly not writing Daniel Dubois off, but I would like to see, if it's possible, some more upper body movement. And if that's not possible, he's going to need to work on that clinch game, as I've said in recent videos. So yeah, that's Daniel Dubois. Next person on the list is Mr. David Adeleye. And as you guys can see, I'm going in order of age, right? You've got two 23-year-olds in Anderson and Torres first, 25-year-old in Dubois, now a 26-year-old in David Adeleye. Now, he is 10-0 with 9 KOs from Ladbroke Grove in West London, 6'4.5". Again, a kind of, in terms of height, a medium-sized heavyweight by today's standard, 6'4.5". And in terms of weight, kind of a smaller heavyweight, right? Turned pro in 2019 at 217. His last fight, he was 231. So yeah, that's definitely a smaller heavyweight in terms of weight. 231 is, I guess, borderline medium size. Actually, no, maybe 231 is a medium sized heavyweight by today's standards. I guess that's debatable too. But certainly when he was turning pro at 217, that's small by today's standards. That's like, again, Alexander Usyk, who's coming up from cruiserweight. But at this age, 26, you're going to be filling out naturally, you're going to be putting on some size. David Adeleye moves very well coordinated. He's got pretty fast hands. His technique is good. He didn't have a really extensive amateur career, incidentally, which to me shows that he picks things up quite quickly because his technique is very polished for someone that didn't have that many amateur fights, all right? So he picks things up quite quickly. And obviously the body mechanics, the biomechanics are quite good for David Adeleye to be that. When I say polished, he obviously doesn't know every trick in the book, but he doesn't look like, let's say, a Deontay Wilder or, and I'm not dissing Wilder here. I'm just saying certain guys just don't look polished. They look ragged, even after many years of fighting. Whereas David Adeleye looks well coordinated. He looks well balanced. That's one of the things about Adeleye that I really like, is the balance of him. And yeah, the speed that he's got because of the fact he's not that heavy, and also the confidence. Adeleye comes across as a very, very confident character. Just like Jared Anderson, he's been in many Tyson Fury training camps. In fact, he's such a regular in Tyson Fury training camps that whenever he goes up to Morecambe in Lancashire, where Tyson Fury lives and trains most of the time, he actually has insurance. He's insured on one of Tyson Fury's cars. That's how regular he is up there. He actually drives one of Tyson Fury's cars around. So yeah, he's getting all that experience in the gym with Tyson Fury. And Tyson Fury recently said that David Adeleye is the future of the division. I certainly think he's going to be there or thereabouts. I'm not predicting he's going to be the number one guy and dominating over everybody, but I think he'll be there or thereabouts, particularly, as I say, because of that confidence he has. A very, very confident guy, confident demeanor, etc. And that's what I like to see. He's got the eye of the tiger, all right? And in fact, this might be something that will rub people up the wrong way. And I'm not doing it to rub people up the wrong way. It's just my gut feeling, right? Based upon more so the personalities of the fighters rather than, let's say, the pedigree or anything like that. I've got more confidence in David Adeleye, to be honest with you, over the long term than I have in Daniel Dubois. Again, might shock you. And maybe I'll turn out to be wrong. Maybe they fight each other down the line and Daniel Dubois does a job. I don't know. But I look at the personalities of fighters. I always felt that Dillian Whyte would do good in the heavyweight division. And he's gone on to do well, right? He hasn't become a world champion, but he's done much better than most people seem to think he would. When I started making videos about Dillian Whyte, particularly in the run-up to the AJ fight, people were saying, oh, no, he's British level at best, and he's never going to go anywhere, and AJ's going to knock him out in a couple of rounds. That's what people were saying. Go back and read the comments. And I was like, nah, I think Dillian Whyte's better than that because of his confidence, because of the mindset. I could see early on in his interviews and from his story that Dillian Whyte was a different kind of character than most heavyweight prospects coming up. He was much more, not just confident, but stubborn, determined, and aggressive, ambitious. There was a lack of fear there with Dillian Whyte. And I see something similar with David Adeleye, okay? I see a mindset which makes me confident that he can actually do some things in the heavyweight division. With Daniel Dubois, he's already done some things. But the demeanor of him, I don't know, it doesn't fill me with as much confidence in him as the demeanor of David Adeleye. Moving on to the next heavyweight on the list, we've got Fabio Wardley. Now, unlike everybody else on the list, Fabio Wardley had no amateur fights at all. He only had a couple of white-collar fights. Okay, I think he only had, 3 or 4 white-collar fights? In America, what do they call white-collar fights? I'm not sure what they would call them there. In America, they have like tough man contests and stuff like that. I mean, white-collar is maybe similar to a tough man contest, a similar kind of world. Do they have what they call white-collar in America? I don't know, but it's something like that. So we had about 3 or 4 of those fights before turning professional. Now, speak about attitude. Fabio Wardley, again, has an attitude, a mindset, a personality, a demeanor, which is impressive. For someone with such little experience to be doing what he's doing right now, going through people like Nathan Gorman after a bad start, getting cut on the nose, getting wobbled, opening up and putting the guy away, this is proven to us that in terms of the ticker, the heart department, Fabio Wardley's got the stuff. He may not have the stuff at the moment technically. He may not have all the experience that he's going to need if he's to reach the pinnacle of the sport, but he's definitely got the heart, all right, from what we've seen so far. Definitely got the confidence and the ambition. And actually, one of the things I forgot to mention is Anderson Forrest had shades of Wardley against Gorman. Right? Anderson didn't get hurt, didn't get wobbled or cut the way Wardley did, but he got angered by Jerry Forrest's success and he went ham on the guy because of it. And of course, that's what we saw with Fabio Wardley against Nathan Gorman. He got wobbled, things were going against him, he was getting outboxed, and he opened up on Nathan Gorman and put him away. So, yeah, that was the story of that fight. Wardley needs a lot of work, 27 years of age, needs a lot of work from a technical perspective. Does he have enough time? I don't know. Some guys, as long as they box, they never really go past a certain level in terms of boxing IQ. Boxing IQ is a lot of the time an innate thing. You obviously improve your boxing IQ over time, but some guys just innately have a better boxing IQ than others, And so they have a head start when they begin fighting, even as kids. And they tend to have, or some of them at least, have a very high ceiling. Their boxing IQ is way, way up there. But other guys, even guys who have boxed for a long time, their boxing IQ improves, but he never goes above a certain level, and it's not a particularly high level. Is Fabio Wardley one of those guys? I don't know. Again, he's had very little experience, but doing what he did against Nathan Gorman is obviously not going to work against everybody. As he steps up, some guys are going to be able to draw Fabio Wardley out, draw his sting, and then punish him. That's what they're going to be able to do. And you're going to need more subtlety in there. You can't just, strong arm your way through every situation. You're going to have to be able to box. You're going to have to be able to take rounds off, learn how to negotiate your way around the ring. Fabio Wardley's still a relatively young guy at 27. He does what he does, and when he's in trouble, he comes steaming back. It's worked for him so far, but there'll need to be more refinement there moving forward. So that's him. Moving on to the next guy on the list. Bakhtir Jalolov, 28 years of age, from Uzbekistan, southpaw, 6'7", a very tall guy, 81-inch reach, now based in Brooklyn, New York. He's currently 12-0 with 12 KOs. The interesting thing about Bakhtir Jalolov is that he turned pro back in 2018. And this is the controversy around the first fight he had with Torres, right? He turned pro back in 2018. But because of the change in rules, he was allowed to compete in amateur tournaments after turning pro. Now, you could ask questions, not just about that change in rules that allows pros to go into the amateurs, but also the mindset of the pros that want to go back into amateur boxing. What does that say about them? And I'll come on to Jalolov's mindset a little bit more. I remember back in the days when Vladimir Klitschko, who was a reigning world champion for many, many years, right, top of the game, he expressed his desire to go fight in the Olympics. I thought that was very off. But that's typical Vladimir Klitschko, to be honest with you. Klitschko, Vladimir, that is not Vitaly so much, but certainly Vladimir, he was an on-top fighter. He was a guy who, if he was dominating and bullying you, he was great. But when somebody put it on him, he tended to crumble. That's how Vladimir was. Mentally, he would crumble. And so him wanting to go into the Olympics when he was a multi-time world champion and he'd been reigning on this unbeaten streak for about 5 years or 6 years or whatever, saying, oh yeah, I want to go fight in the Olympics. That to me showed Vladimir's kind of bully boy mentality. I know he's got this great sport. I'm not here just bashing Vladimir Klitschko for the sake of it. I'm going to tie it all into Jalolov in a second. But yeah, Klitschko had this image of being the great sportsman and all this kind of stuff. Well, what did you see when he fought Tyson Fury, folks? He tried to headbutt Tyson Fury, one of the most blatant headbutts you'll ever see. Not one of these 50-50 type head clashes where you're like, well, was that intentional? No. When Vladimir Klitschko fought Tyson Fury, he launched the top of his head into Fury's face because Fury was outboxing him. That's your great sportsman, Vladimir Klitschko. That showed you the mentality that's actually in there. And Klitschko was one of the dirtiest fighters I ever saw, by the way, Vladimir Klitschko. And you go look at that Povetkin fight, how on earth he wasn't disqualified in that fight, I'll never know. For the absurdly excessive holding, the ridiculous extent to which he was leaning on Povetkin, to the point where Klitschko's feet were coming off the canvas because he was leaning on Povetkin that much. I mean, totally ridiculous. Right? But this is the mentality of Vladimir Klitschko. Bully boy is really what he was. Spongy canvases, shenanigans with the opponent's gloves, and all this carry-on with Vladimir Klitschko. Just absurd stuff. Is Jalolov cut from that same cloth? Is he a bit of a bully boy? Is he a bit of an on-top fighter? And when things are going against him, he capitulates. Is there any evidence for that? Well, let's just talk about the strengths before we move on to that. He has a very refined technique. He's got a tremendous left hand. You do not want to get caught with Bakhtir Jalolov's left hand because in most cases, you will get put to sleep. You're going to be hurt badly. You're going to be in serious trouble. He likes to stay out of the way and walk you onto that shot. He says, and this is why I bring Klitschko in, that he liked the Klitschkos and he wants to emulate what they did, not just in terms of achievement, but fighting in that safety first kind of style. Now, thus far, from what I've seen in his career, he doesn't grab as much as certainly Vladimir Klitschko, but he certainly does a lot of the jab, staying at long range, walking people onto his shots, and minimizing the amount that he takes. And he's looked very effective in doing so far. You know, when you watch, certainly if you've ever boxed, right? When I watch heavyweights, I imagine myself in there against them. And Jalilov would be a nightmare. I mean, all of these guys would be a nightmare, right? but you can't help it. You know, when you've boxed, especially if you're watching people that box at the same weight that you used to box at, you can't help but think about what would it be like fighting the guy? What would I do? How would I approach it? And there are certain styles that you see where you're like, nah. I wouldn't even like to think about how I would approach it, because I don't know how, even in my wildest imagination, I could actually beat this guy, you know? And look, I'm not saying I could have beat any of these guys, obviously, but talking from the perspective of the imagination. So, yeah, Jalilov just looks like a very, very difficult guy to fight, extremely difficult. And he's got his routine down to a T at this point of keeping you on the end of his right jab and walking you onto that devastating left hand. Now, so far in his career, hasn't fought the top tier opposition, but he did stop Kamil Sokolovsky in 5 rounds earlier on this year. And to put that in perspective, Sokolovsky gave David Adeleye a stern test. Many people felt that Adeleye actually lost that fight. I wasn't one of them personally, but yeah, many people felt he lost that fight. And yeah, Sokolovsky, even though he's a journeyman, has given lots of up-and-comers a very, very tough go of it, and he's actually managed to upset a few of them. Jalilov stopped him in 5 rounds. And Sokolovsky knocked down twice in round 5. He then fought somebody who I think he might have fought in the amateurs, Mulawai, and he knocked him out in 8. And Mulawai was a real tough game guy, but he got knocked out bad in the end. And then in his last fight, he fought Curtis Harper, who he also knocked out. Harper famously got out of the ring before the opening bell, or was it just after the opening bell, against Efe Ajagba. And by the way, Efe Ajagba is actually not on this list. Maybe I should have put him on the list. But I've got 12 fighters on this list. It's a nice even number. Perhaps I should have. Oh, no, actually, no. Excuse me. Efe Ajagba is on the list. I just checked there. I thought I hadn't included him. All right, we'll get to him in just a second. But anyway, back to Bakatir Jalilov. So Curtis Harper was his last fight, knocked him out in 4 rounds. Now, extensive amateur background, Olympic gold medalist, World Championship gold medalist, I believe, as well. That's when he knocked out. And this is where the real controversy is. That's where he knocked out Richard Torres Jr. back in 2019. So this fight here against Richard Torres is when he was already pro, Jalilov, I believe. Now, that's not as bad as Vladimir Klitschko, a reigning world champion, going into, you know, a amateur tournament. So I personally don't have that much of an issue with it, because he'd only just turned pro, you know? So I don't really have that much of an issue. But I know other people did, such as the president of WBC, because you can see him here commenting on Bakatir Jalilov's knockout win over Richard Torres. He said they're brutal and criminal to allow a professional boxer, Jalilov, who is 6-0 as a pro, to fight outclassed, outweighed, and far smaller USA 20-year-old amateur Torres. Okay, in the AIBA World Championships. And Jalilov is scheduled for his 7th pro fight in 11 days in the United States. I don't think it was quite as bad as Mauricio Sulaimán's making it out to be, because again, the fact that Torres had lots of amateur experience himself, and Jalilov was only 6-0. He was fighting better people in the amateurs than he was in his first 6 professional fights. I don't think it was that bad. And in Eastern Europe, the Olympic gold medal is held in much higher esteem, much higher regard than it is in most Western countries, particularly in America, where, you know, gold medals are cool to have, but people aren't as impressed by them in the boxing fraternity as they are in Eastern Europe or I guess Uzbekistan, is that in Asia? That might be Central Asia. Well, that part of the world, the old Eastern Bloc, as people used to call it. So you could ask questions about his mentality, wanting to go back and fight amateurs when he's getting professional level training for 6 fights. But the thing for me about Jalolov, and the question I have about him, and it's a similar question that I've always had about Vladimir Klitschko, well, in fact, it wasn't even a question with Klitschko. I think we really saw that he wasn't the strongest minded fighter out there. I'm not saying he was the weakest minded fighter out there either, but Klitschko did capitulate a number of times in his career. He fell apart several times. Vladimir, I'm talking about. And with Jalolov, I'm looking for the fight here in his amateur record. Where are we at? Because he fought someone who we all know, I'm going to come to in a moment. Yeah, there we go. Back in 2016, in the Rio Olympics, he fought a certain Mr. Joe Joyce. If you go and watch that fight, he also lost to Ivan Ditchko, who I might have included on this list. I haven't included him, but some people should, maybe give that as an honorable mention. They'll say I should have given that as an honorable mention. He's been beaten by Ditchko at least twice here in the amateurs. Ditchko, of course, was beaten soundly by Anthony Joshua in the 2012 Olympics. That's where some of you guys may know him from. And he is a professional at the moment. I think Ditchko must be in his 30s at this point. So he's getting on in age, and he really hasn't been fighting anyone or doing anything. So not sure what's going on with him. But anyway, Jalolov fought Joe Joyce in the Olympics, and he was beaten virtually into submission. He started early, throwing big left hands at Joyce, but Joyce did what he does. Joyce in the amateurs fought at a higher tempo than he does in the pros because of the fact that he had fewer rounds. So Joyce really was set about these people. And he was lighter back then, so he could move in quicker than he can now, Joyce. And he just beat the fight right out of Bakatir Jalolov. And I've seen fighters who are around today get stopped in the amateurs, such as Deontay Wilder. I'll give Deontay Wilder his credit. He's always shown tremendous heart in a boxing ring. When you look at the defeats to Tyson Fury, he went down swinging. He never had the fight in terms of the spirit beat out of him. He was game right up until the end against Tyson Fury. And the same was the case in the amateurs when Deontay Wilder got stopped. You see some guys get stopped and they look like a deer in the headlights. They look sorry for themselves and all that kind of thing. With Deontay Wilder, there was defiance right up until the last. He was absolutely defiant when he got stopped in the amateurs. There was no quitting him. There was no looking sorry for himself. He wanted to keep going, but they stopped it, right? With Bakatir Jalolov, when he fought Joe Joyce, and the fight did go the distance, Jalolov, to me, the body language, it didn't look good. He looked like a guy who wanted out. He looked like a guy who felt sorry for himself against Joe Joyce, So, and remember, at this age, I think Jalolov must have been, so back in 2016, we're in 2022 now, 6 years ago. So Jalolov would have been, I guess, in his early 20s. He's 28 now. Let's say he was 22. Yeah, you can definitely grow as a person from the age of 22 to 28, for sure. But sometimes there are certain aspects of your character that never really go away. With Vladimir Klitschko, prime example. Yeah, he fell apart against Ross Purity, later on fell apart against Lamont Brewster. Corey Sanders did him in a couple rounds in between those two fights. So he always had that kind of issue with his mindset, Vladimir Klitschko. And that's why he ended up fighting the way he did. As good as Klitschko was, and that's why it was so frustrating watching Klitschko over the years, because he was such a talented heavyweight. Very, very talented Vladimir Klitschko. But because of the flaws in his character, he fought very dirty, okay, and wanted every single advantage imaginable because of the weaknesses that he had psychologically. With Jalolov, we haven't seen, that kind of funny business yet, but he's not really in a power position in boxing to be able to get away with the kind of things that Klitschko was able to get away with. But I would just say keep an eye on Jalolov in that regard, as far as his mentality. And when someone puts it on him, when someone can take that left hand or block that left hand and walk him down, the way that Joe Joyce did, just watch and see how Jalilov reacts in the future. It's just something worth noting. So anyway, it sounds like I'm being really negative on Jalilov. I actually think he might be the best of the bunch. At the moment, he looks the most developed of the bunch. But I'm not here to fanboy for fighters, okay? I'm looking at the strengths and I'm looking at the weaknesses. And like I say, Jalilov looks like the most polished at the moment of this new generation. Although, again, some of the borderline guys, the guys who you could say are current generation rather than next generation, some of them you could say, you might argue are just as developed or more, but certainly of the younger guys, of the people firmly in the next generation, Jalilov, I think you could well argue he's the most developed out of all of them. And obviously he's got the accolades from the amateurs to back that up, being the Olympic gold medalist. So could turn out to be the best of the bunch. And he's actually been bigged up by Jared Anderson. Anderson has spoken about Jalilov, spoken about fighting him in the future. And he said this guy's real good. He's got a real nice left hand, knows what he's doing in the ring. So yeah, Jalilov, dangerous, dangerous, dangerous guy. But if there are any weaknesses, it could be a mental weakness rather than a physical weakness. So anyway, moving on from Jalilov, we've got Efe Ajagba. I thought I hadn't included him on the list. I have. 28 years of age, from Nigeria, 16-1, 13 KOs, 6'6" tall, crazy long reach at 85 inches. That one loss, of course, was to Frank Sanchez, another person on this list. He was down in round 7 in that fight. Now, Ajagba is a tremendous puncher. I mean, he might be right up there with Bakatir Jalilov as the hardest puncher in the new generation. It's arguable, but I think it's a reasonable argument to make that he's right up there with Jalilov in terms of the hardest punchers next gen. Certainly doesn't have the refinement that Jalilov has, doesn't move as well, upright, clunky, not the fastest guy in the world. And I think it's fair to even question his mindset as well, because in the Frank Sanchez fight, he seemed to maybe get stung with a few shots from Frank Sanchez at some point in that fight, and that slowed down his aggression on the front foot. And then, of course, he gets dropped, and he didn't react with defiance either. It's not always best, of course, to get up off the canvas and start swinging, the way that, let's say, Andy Ruiz did against Anthony Joshua. If you've got the height and reach to stay out of the way, sometimes that's a better idea. With Andy Ruiz, he didn't have the height and reach to stay away. He had to start firing back, right? With Efe Ajagba, okay, you might be able to make that argument that it would have been better to stay away rather than fire back. But he has a very flat demeanor at Ajagba. He comes across as just, I don't want to say a placid character, but just a bit robotic, a bit monotone and all that kind of thing. And he fights like that. There isn't much pace in what Efe Ajagba does. There's plenty of power, tremendous power in that right hand, but there isn't that much pace. And I know he's been working, I think, with Ronnie Shields. They were doing a few things with him. He was a PBC fighter before, but now I think he's with, is it ESPN Top Rank? Let me check the event he fought on last. Yeah, Bob Arum. So he's with ESPN Top Rank now, so he's changed to a different promotional team. I'm not sure if that's going to pay off. His next fight, interestingly enough, is on the 14th of January 2023 against Oscar Rivas. Now, I thought Oscar Rivas was going to fight or defend his Bridgerweight world title against Alan Babbage. But it seems now that Oscar Rivas is fighting Efe Ajagba. Now, Oscar Rivas, of course, is I believe, top-ranked fighter as well. I know he's associated with Yvonne Michel over there in Canada, but I think he might also have some association with Top Rank. In any event, that's an interesting fight. Oscar Rivas versus Efe Ajagba. Oscar Rivas, top-heavy guy, very muscular, pretty quick hands, good amateur background. Obviously, Rivas is from Colombia. He's an older guy than Efe Ajagba, much shorter guy, who in the early rounds is dangerous, but he seems to fade quite badly. That's a pattern we've seen now of Oscar Rivas over the years. Certainly in the Dillian Whyte fight, he faded quite badly down the stretch. Dillian Whyte put him in his box. I think it was in the second round where Rivas was very aggressive and Dillian Whyte caught him with a shot. And after that, Rivas kind of backed off and gave Dylan White his space. So that's going to be an interesting one, Ajagba versus Rivas. I think a lot of people at this stage don't really have much faith in Efe Ajagba, and that's probably a good thing because that alleviates a lot of the pressure. When you're an up-and-coming fighter and you're knocking people out and people are expecting big things from you, then they want to see you win with big names. They don't want to give you much time to develop. They don't want to give you much time to learn. They're eager to see you in there against, either fellow contenders, fellow prospects, or the best in the world. Efe Ajagba has fallen short when he stepped up against Frank Sanchez. He's kind of gone off the radar. He's moved from PBC to top rank. He's now got time, if he wants, to have that rebuilding process, to learn things. He's only 16-1, remember, right? So he does have a bit of time on his side to learn the craft. So we'll see what happens. But I know a lot of people are kind of writing Efe Ajagba off already. I don't think you can ever write somebody off, realistically, with this kind of power and this kind of height, right? 6'6", 85-inch reach. He's always going to have a chance against anyone when he can hit like that. But, maybe they want to work on putting him in there against some more movers, because it's not just the Tyson Furies and the Alexander Usyks of the world that can move. Some of the next generation, some of his contemporaries can also move. Jalolov can move, despite being a big guy. Wardley can move a bit. Adeleye can certainly move. Not so much Dubois. Torres can move. And of course, Anderson can move. So maybe they want to put Efe Ajagba in there against some movers, because Sanchez showed the blueprint of how to beat this guy, or at least one way to beat the guy, with movement. Big, stiff heavyweight, struggles to track a moving target. So that's Efe Ajagba. Anyway, moving on to the next guy here. Frank Sanchez. Now, Sanchez, 30 years of age. I find that questionable. But we won't focus on that in this video. 6'4", 78-inch reach. I think he's a dark horse in the division. Sanchez is very, very fast. I'm not sure he has quite as fast a hands as Andy Ruiz. In fact, I don't think he does. But other than Ruiz, he might be the fastest-handed fighter in the heavyweight division. He's got real fast hands, Frank Sanchez. Go look at that Efe Ajagba fight and try to tell me that he don't have fast hands. And he's explosive with it. He's not the biggest puncher in the world, but if he catches you off guard and puts the shots together as he did against the Ajagba, he can still hurt you and he can still drop you. So he's definitely not anyone to be scoffed at. Again, medium-sized heavyweight by today's standards at 6'4". Last fight, 247. I'd like to see him come in lighter than that. Against Carlos Negron, not his best performance. Normally, no higher than 240. As you can see against Christian Hammer, 239, 240, 237, 229. Early on in his career, he was real light. Look at this. Barely over cruiserweight back in 2017 when he turned pro. I think the lighter he is, the better it's going to be for him. I know a lot of heavyweights get caught up in this size game where they want to be big and strong and they want to be able to hit hard. And I think Sanchez is with Joe Goossen now. I'm not sure if that's going to be the best fit. Is Joe Goossen trying to get him? I think I have heard Joe Goossen say that he wants Frank Sanchez to be more exciting. Maybe that's why he come in heavier. Sanchez is not that kind of guy. That's not his game. I think it's a bad idea to have him start putting weight on and be more stationary and try and take people out. I think Sanchez's best bet in the heavyweight division is to be the light guy, is to be the guy who can move and outmaneuver the bigger, clunkier heavyweights, catch them off guard and surprise them. I much preferred Frank Sanchez with Eddie Reynoso, Canelo's trainer. Obviously, Eddie Reynoso's lost loads of fighters since Canelo lost to Bivol. I'm not sure what that's all about. But I think Sanchez should just concentrate on being the mover. I know he wants to make money and sell tickets and this, that, and the other, but his time will come, His time will come, particularly as the older generation start filtering out and retiring and stuff like that. Sanchez will get his opportunities, maybe for one of those vacant belts. And I think if he wants to give himself the best chance of winning, come in light. Don't come in at 247. Yeah, think about it, people. 30 years of age, right? Last fight, 247. Back in 2017, he's 199 pounds. So you're talking about, in the space of 5 years, packing on nearly 50 pounds. People, that's not good. And it's not like he's fat, right? He's put pack loads of muscle on, and obviously questions are going to be asked, right? How does a guy in the space of 5 years, right? So from when he's supposedly 25 to the age of 30, put on 50 pounds. That's 10 pounds a year, right? If you average it out, and it's mostly muscle. So yeah, you can definitely raise an eyebrow and ask questions about it. But especially at that age, right? If you're going to put weight on and you're going to fill out, it's not normally going to be low, 50 pounds from 25 to 30, from the age of 25 to 30. You're more likely to put on a lot of weight from the age of 20 to 25 rather than 25 to 30. So anyway, I'm talking about muscle. Anyway, Frank Sanchez, that's my take on him. The Cuban Flash, I think he needs to get back to the moving. Forget about the stuff Joe Goosen is telling him. His identity coming from that Cuban amateur system is as a mover. That's his identity. That's who he is. That's what he does best. Standing and slugging, I think, will work against him. Anyway, moving on. Next person on the list, we've got Filip Hrgović. And this is one of the guys for me. Maybe you could include Frank Sanchez in it as well. Maybe Efe Ajagba. But certainly with Filip Hrgović, he's on the borderline. I didn't know whether to include him on this list, whether you would say he is a current-gen heavyweight or a next-gen heavyweight, because he is 30. He turned professional back in 2017 against Rafael Zembano Love. So again, we're talking about a good 5 years ago now. Is he current-gen? Is he next-gen? He hasn't had a world title shot yet. He is the mandatory challenger for the IBF, and the current champion, of course, is Alexander Usyk. He just had a very tough fight with Zhilei Zhang. Many people were unimpressed. Many people felt that Zhilei Zhang beat him. And I certainly can't argue with those people. I thought it was a close fight. Maybe Zhang was a little hard done by, but I don't think Hrgović getting the nod was the worst thing I've ever seen in the world. I certainly wouldn't call it a robbery per se, but I can understand why Zhang felt like he'd done enough to win, and why many other people did as well. 6'6" tall, from Croatia, 15-0 with 12 KOs. Very Vitaly Klitschko-esque, both in his style and in his attitude. Not quite as tall as Vitaly, but only an inch or two in it. Very similar, as I say, stylistically. He can punch, he can box, and he's shown a good chin. He did get dropped in the Zhilei Zhang fight, but that's not really a legitimate knockdown. He got pulled down on the back of the head, if you watch that slow-mo. The punch doesn't land anywhere near Filip Hrgovic's face. And it's the inside of... I've watched that slow-mo replay a million times. I'm exaggerating, but I've watched it a lot of times. I watched that loads of times, even recently. The other day I watched it again. And the inside of Zhilei Zhang's right glove is on the back of Filip Hrgovic's head. And he pulls him down. And that's what causes the knockdown. And you watch that fight back. Zhang hits Hrgović bang on the chin with much cleaner, much better shots than that throughout the fight, and Hrgović stays upright. So one thing I think that people are underestimating, or maybe overlooking, is how good Filip Hrgovic's chin is. This guy's got real solid whiskers. I'm not saying he can't be knocked out, but there are a lot of people saying that Joe Joyce is this Iron Man and all this kind of thing. Joe Joyce got knocked out in the amateurs early by what's that Russian heavyweight called? Who fought Martin Bakole? I always forget his name. Fought David Price. Tubby guy. Was beaten by Michael Hunter. Always forget the guy's name. In fact, we might find it. He might have fought Hrgović too. Of course, Hrgović had an extensive amateur background, fought in the WSB, fought Joe Joyce, lost to Tony Yoka in the Olympics. I thought that was a horrible decision. I thought that Filip Hrgović beat Tony Yoka and beat him quite well there. Lost to Nista on a split decision in 2016. Nista, you guys might remember, stopped Anthony Joshua in the amateurs. So let's have a look if we can find the guy who I'm thinking of. Beat Tony Yoka. Was awarded a decision over Tony Yoka in 2015, the previous year, on a split decision in Doha, in Qatar. Where's the guy I'm thinking of? Why do I always forget that guy's name? His name was Sergey Kuzmin, excuse me, there he is. Sergey Kuzmin, right? So Joe Joyce was knocked out by Kuzmin in a couple rounds. And yeah, you can say that Joyce wasn't that experienced then, but he was still a fully grown man. He was knocked out by Kuzmin, I think, when he was about 27, Joyce. Yeah, about 27 years of age, you got knocked out by Kuzmin. Is your chin going to improve that much from the age of 27 to the age of 37? I don't think so. So even though Joyce has got a good chin, there's no doubt Joyce has got a good chin. I do think people are going a bit overboard. When I think of an iron jaw, I don't think of Joe Joyce. When I think of an iron jaw, to use that term, iron jaw, I think of George Chuvalo. I think of Oliver McCall. That's who I think about when they say iron jaw. And in more recent times, I think of Marius Wack. Marius Wack has only just, at whatever age he is now, I think he's mid-40s, he's only just suffered a knockdown for the first time in his career. And even then, he was kind of just bludgeoned and overwhelmed to the canvas. It wasn't like he was decked, where he gets hit with a shot and he falls backwards. No, Marius Wack, for my money, has had the best chin in the heavyweight division for years, for at least the past 10 years. Yeah, you go look at that fight he had with Vladimir Klitschko. He took right hand off the right hand, left hand of Klitschko for 12 rounds, the kind of shots that decked Anthony Joshua, the kind of shots that knocked Eddie Chambers out cold, that knocked Tony Thompson out cold, that floored Kubrat Pulev numerous times. Those shots were hitting Marius Wack on the chin and nothing was happening. Like they were hitting him flush. It's not like he got caught with one or two. He got caught with loads of them. Flush shots, bang on the chin for 12 rounds, right? Terrible defense from Marius Wack. Slow fighter. But nothing happened. The guy's got a tremendous chin, or he had, right? He's an old guy now, and obviously punch resistance eventually will deteriorate. Tremendous chin. That's what I call an iron jaw. Joe Joyce, good chin, yes. Iron jaw, people are going over the top for my money. I suspect Filip Hrgović might actually have a better chin than Joyce. I'm not stating that as a fact or anything like that. It's just a suspicion. I think Hrgović might actually have a better chin. They did fight in the WSB. Joe Joyce did win on points over Filip Hrgović. He just powered forward and overwhelmed him. You can see here the World Series of Boxing. Split decision over 5 in the WSB. He lost to Joe Joyce. But he's got that amateur pedigree, Filip Hrgović. As far as I'm aware, looking through his amateur record here, no stoppages recorded, at least not on BoxRec, and BoxRec, of course, don't normally have the full amateur record for, most boxers. But I'm not aware of him ever being stopped in the amateurs or ever being dropped in the amateurs, Filip Hrgović. Okay, did fight Roberto Camarel. He's certainly been outboxed a few times, outpointed, outworked. But in terms of knocked out, no. And I think that he is better than the Zhilei Zhang fight made him look. I think he underestimated Zhang. I underestimated Zhang. I didn't expect much from him. Zhang actually had far more explosive punches than I expected. I mean, I think that was really Zhang turning up because he felt like this was his opportunity. Maybe the only opportunity he's going to get to become a mandatory challenger and potentially fight for a world title. So I think Zhang turned up feeling like this was his moment in life, that he needs to rise to the occasion, whereas Filip Hrgović perhaps turned up thinking this is a foregone conclusion. And obviously Filip Hrgović suffered a bereavement of the death of his dad going into the fight. That could have affected him, of course. So, I don't want to make any excuses for the guy, but I do believe that he's better than the Zhang fight showed. I'm certainly not sleeping on Filip Hrgović. I think he's a danger man in the heavyweight division. So keep an eye on Croatia's Filip Hrgović moving forward. Again, I'm not saying he's going to dominate the division or be the next Vitaly Klitschko. He's Vitaly Klitschko-esque, right? He isn't Vitaly Klitschko. He's just Klitschko-esque. But El Animal certainly, I don't think, should be slept on. Moving on to the next guy. We've got Frazer Clarke. Again, I'm moving in terms of age here, right? The Jaguar 28, Sanchez was next on the list. What's Sanchez's age here? Oh, 30, excuse me. Lost it for a second. Hrgović, 30. Frazer Clarke, 31. Frazer Clarke, 4-0, 3 KOs, extensive amateur background, was stopped by Joe Joyce, beaten soundly by Joyce a number of times in the unpaid ranks. So far, he's beaten not much other than Kamil Sokolovsky, who we know is a tough journeyman. That fight went a distance over 6, didn't actually watch it. We have a look at his amateur highlights here. So, stopped by Bakatir Jalilov in the semifinals. of the Olympics. So that puts him into context quite recently, right? This is basically last year he got stopped against Bakatir Jalilov in the Olympics. So again, Jalilov far more advanced at this stage than a Frazer Clarke. Should go over Clark's age again, 31, 6'6", so he's a big man and he's a heavy man as well. We'll come into that in a second. Lost an SD back in 2021 as well in an amateur bout. Having a look at some of the other names here, seeing any of the, gonna look for names I recognize. Lost to Babin or Babanin. I struggle with some of these names. What else we got here? All right, so, he's been fighting at a high level in the amateurs all around the world. That experience obviously will help him when it comes to professional boxing, where sometimes you do have to get on the road and fight in other places. So that will stand him in good stead. But again, at his age, he's going to need to get a move on. He doesn't have, loads and loads of time on his side. Obviously, he is in the heavyweight division, and they do tend to age a bit more slowly than smaller fighters. Joe Joyce probably turned pro at a similar kind of age. But Joe Joyce was more successful in the amateurs than Frazer Clarke was. So, when a guy has been losing to Joe Joyce over and over again, turning pro, ideally, you'd want to see him be 25, 24, because then you got some time to actually develop him and get him to a stage where maybe he can go in against the Joe Joyce in a rematch in the pros and win, or have a better chance of winning. And obviously his career is not all about trying to take revenge on Joe Joyce, but I just use that as an example of how much development is going to be needed to get Frazer Clarke up to the point where he's a serious contender at world level or even a champion. For me, the jury is very much still out on Frazer Clarke. Again, big man, 271 pounds against Kamil Sokolovsky, turned pro at 256. He's certainly not a body beautiful. This is a guy that carries a lot of flesh, a lot of fat on his body. Nothing crazy. It's not Andy Ruiz level, but he's a pretty fleshy looking heavyweight. And, you wonder, start of 2022 in February, 256, but 271 by the end. That doesn't seem like a good look to me, people. He's 31 years of age, so it's not like he's going to be filling out loads at this point, is it? At 31. So I don't like putting on all this weight in the space of a year from 256 to 271 when you're 31 or 30, 31. So yeah, he's got relatively, I'm going to say he's got above average hand speed for a man of this size. Above average hand speed. Surely he can hit quite hard at this size. To be fair, right? This will give us somewhat of a yardstick. This guy that he beat, Bracamonte, this guy, in his second pro fight. Bracamonte, in his previous fight, right, he'd fought, he looks a bit like Mauricio Sulaiman in the face in this picture, doesn't he? The WBC president. Bracamonte, prior to fighting Frazer Clarke, had been the distance with a comebacking Jarrell Miller. A very big man, Bracamonte, in terms of weight. Look at him here against Jarrell Miller. 305 pounds, but was dwarfed by the enormous 341-pound Miller. Who, I don't know how he gets up to this kind of size. Obviously, we know that Miller was popped on the juice many, many times, but still enormous these days at 341. He went the distance with Miller, Bracamonte, then goes in against Frazer Clarke and gets beaten in 2 rounds. So, that can give you a yardstick and show you where Frazer Clarke is at, but at the same time, we don't know how much Miller has been affected by presumably no longer being on the juice. So, yeah, that's all I'll say about Frazer Clarke, really. I don't have too much to say about him. He seems all right, but I don't have that much confidence in him becoming one of the main guys in the heavyweight division. I'm sure he'll get into the top 10 if he hasn't. Well, no, he can't have been ranked in the top 10 by now. He's only 4 fights in. But yeah, I'm sure he'll be ranked in the top 10, top 15 at some stage. But I would actually, at this point, be surprised if he went on to be one of the main, let's say, 3-4 heavyweights in the division. I'd be surprised. But I've been surprised by fighters before. So moving on to the last 2. We got Arslanbek Makhmudov. 33 years of age. He's from Russia, but based in Canada, 6'5", and he is like a caveman. And weirdly enough, look at his face. Who does he remind you of, people? He looks like a giant version of Isaac Lowe. Isn't that weird? He's got that kind of Amish vibe about him. He's like Isaac Lowe's big brother or something, right? So a big man, a strong man, heavy-handed man, but crude. He doesn't have the typical thing that you would see from one of these, fighters from the former Eastern Bloc who are well-schooled and, the technique is all nice and neat and polished and all that kind of thing. Yeah, with Makhmudov, there's very little of that. It's caveman stuff. It's clubbing away with big, heavy shots. In his last fight, he fought Carlos Takam. A lot of people were not impressed by his performance there against Carlos Takam, who was down in round 1 and round 7. People felt like he struggled. People felt like he should have been able to take Carlos Takam out. Styles make fights. He did put Takam on the floor. I personally don't think it's the end of the world that he's going a distance with a wily vet like Carlos Takam and having a few issues. His style is going to work well against certain people, Makhmudov. People who he can pin down the way that he did with Mariusz Wach a couple fights back. Right? Pinned Mariusz Wach in the corner and was able to bludgeon the guy to the canvas and get the stoppage. The first guy ever, to my knowledge, to put Mariusz Wach down. Mariusz Wach has been stopped before, but always a corner retirement or stopped by the referee on his feet. Never been down before. Makhmudov, the first guy to do it. That's no mean feat, even against an old Mariusz Wach. No mean feat. So, yeah, he is the kind of guy who, if you are a more stationary fighter, if you're a guy that likes to be slick and do this, that, and the other, in the pocket, you might have problems with Makhmudov. You better have a bicycle. You better be able to get away. Because if he can pin you down and start bludgeoning, you're going to have problems. He's a very powerful, heavy-handed man, caveman of a fighter. You look for his career so far, hasn't fought anybody really. Got some names there, of course. Samuel Peter. Shocking that he's still fighting in 2019, right? A few years ago now. But Carlos Takam is his best win to date, along with Mariusz Wach. Erkan Tepe retired him in 1 round. Pavel Sauer. A number of people here. His next fight is against Michael Wallisch. And Michael Wallisch, probably not even as good as Carlos Takam, to be fair. That's kind of a step down, I think. Wallisch was knocked out by Gassiev last year. Stopped by Joe Joyce in 2020. Stopped by Tony Yoka in 2019. So yeah, this guy's definitely not as good. And stopped by Efe Ajagba too. This is a step down from the Takams of the world. So not really good when you're 33 years of age to be stepping down. He's currently 15-0, 14 KOs. You don't want to be stepping down at this stage. You want to be stepping up from Carlos Takam. So yeah, not the greatest to see him fighting a Michael Wallisch. We'll see where his career goes from here. But I don't think you should underestimate Makhmudov, particularly if Makhmudov turns out to have a real good chin. If he's got a chin anything like Mariusz Wach, then he's going to be a dangerous hombre. Yeah, I'm certainly not going to say he's going to be dominating the division or anything like that. But a dangerous hombre because he's a big man who can punch and he's very, very physically strong. So we'll see where he goes. And the final heavyweight to talk about here, again, on the borderline, you could class him as current gen, you could class him as new gen, and that's Joe Joyce. And I say you could because of the fact that he hasn't had that many fights, 15-0, 14 KOs, 37 years of age, so he's up there. He's actually older than the champions. He's older than Usyk, he's older than Fury, older than Joshua. It's only the fact that he's turned pro much later than those guys that could, that you could make an argument that he's actually next gen rather than current gen. And he's had much fewer fights than those guys. Turned pro back in 2017, about 5 years ago now. And of all the people on the list, of course, Joe Joyce has the best resume in the pros. And even in the amateurs, you could argue, obviously Jalolov was gold medalist, but Joe Joyce has already beaten Jalolov. So that's a debatable thing. Joe Joyce in the professional game has had a good career so far. Turned pro against Ian Lewison, which at the time was a good debut to have, a good level to come in at. Beat Lemroy Thomas, ran through him like a train. Kaladze, that's a guy who, kind of a journeyman/fringe contender who actually turns up a lot of the time to have a go. Joe Joyce ran through him. Joe Hanks, Joyce ran through him. Berman Stavern, former champion. Joe Joyce got clipped a few times, but ran through him. Alexander Ustinov, Joe Joyce dispatched of him. Bryant Jennings. See, that's the only fight in Joyce's career thus far where he actually came close to losing. And many people feel like Jennings was hard done by against Joe Joyce. He hurt Joyce to the body, and that was a very, very tough, close fight. This scorecard here, 117, 110, 118, 109 in favor of Joyce. I mean, this is criminal. This is criminal. There's no way Joyce won by those margins. Ridiculous. One of the judges had it 115, 112 to Joyce. I mean, even that is a push. Really, this was a razor close fight that Jennings could have easily won. If Jennings had got the decision here, I would not have complained. All right? So that fight there may have shown the blueprint of how to beat Joe Joyce with movement, with slickness, particularly if you're maybe a smaller heavyweight that can duck underneath a lot of Joe Joyce's big clubbing shots. So maybe that's something that some fighters, let's say a Frank Sanchez, might want to look at, is Bryant Jennings' performance. But other than that, it's been perfect for Joe Joyce. Beat Michael Wallisch, I already mentioned that. Daniel Dubois, of course, was a good win for him. Stopped him in 10 rounds, forced him to quit just using the jab. And of course, we've seen from Joyce, who's an enormous man, 6'6", 80-inch reach, 270 pounds for his last fight. When he fought Daniel Dubois, he was 258. When he wants to, he can move. He can get on a jab. Right? He doesn't just have to be the come forward George Foreman-esque slugger as he is in most of his fights. When he feels sufficiently threatened by the opponent's power and the ability to land their power, he can get on his bike, as we saw against Dubois, although that's going to be more difficult if you come in at 270 as opposed to coming in at 258. Maybe we're going to see some strategic weight from Joe Joyce, whereby when he's going to fight a bigger puncher, he comes in lighter. I think that would be the way to go, personally. Like, let's say he fights a Deontay Wilder. A lot of people are saying they want to see that one. They want to see the biggest punch in the division versus allegedly the best chin in the division and see who comes out on top. If he was to have that fight, I think he needs to come in light. If he comes in heavy, personally, I think that's a mistake. 258 is heavy enough if he manages to break Wilder down, and replicate what Tyson Fury did in terms of pushing him back later on in the fight. Once he's drawn Wilder's sting, push him back later on in the fight and bully him. 258 is plenty heavy enough to do that. I just think in the early rounds, he's going to need to be light enough to be able to pop that jab. Right? He's got a nice jab. Pop that jab and just keep Deontay Wilder off balance for a few rounds. Break him down with a jab for a bit before pushing forward, because that's really what Tyson Fury did in the third fight with Wilder. He didn't just go steaming straight in the way he did in the second fight, because Wilder wasn't prepared for it. He didn't expect that. I didn't expect that in the second fight. No. In the third fight, he realized Wilder was prepared for an early rush. So he had to kind of box his way in a little bit for the first few rounds and obviously, suffered a couple of knockdowns. I think Joe Joyce needs a similar approach. Just if he's going to fight Wilder, box his way in a bit, and he needs to be a bit lighter than 270, I would imagine, in order to do that most effectively. But anyway, beat Daniel Dubois, Carlos Takam, Christian Hammer, and he's getting caught with big shots in these fights. Joe Joyce doesn't have the greatest defense a lot of the time. He's not defensive-minded a lot of the time, but he can be when he wants to be. And then in his last fight against Joseph Parker, the most high-profile opponent, the most accomplished opponent he's beaten so far, Joe Parker obviously being a former WBO World Heavyweight Champion, been in there with the likes of Derek Chisora, Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz, so on and so forth. Joe Joyce became the first guy to stop Joseph Parker when he got him out of there in 11 rounds with a real good knockout from a left hand in the end. So, yeah, Joe Joyce, the most accomplished, also the oldest on the list. Will he become a world heavyweight champion at some point? Who do you guys think? Drop it in the comments. Who do you guys think will be heavyweight champions out of all the guys on this list? Will Joyce be one of them? Makhmudov, Frazer Clark, Hrgovic, Frank Sanchez, Efe Jagba, Jalolov, Wardley, David Adelaide. Daniel Dubois already has a regular title, but I'm talking about the proper belts. Torres or Jared Anderson. Who do you guys think are most likely to become world champions? Personally, if you had to take a punt right now, I would say the most likely, and look, the reason that I might not pick Joyce as one of the most likely, let's say the top 3 most likely, is mostly because of his age and the fact that you've got Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk around at the moment. So, you know, in future, the belts are going to become more fragmented. And I think it's going to be easier to pick up a belt when they're more fragmented, right? Will Joyce still be around by then? Again, he's 37 now. See, this is why I'm not sure that I would put him in my top 3 most likely to become a world champion, because I don't know when the belts are going to become fragmented and so on. And obviously, yeah, he might get a shot against Usyk or Fury. Would you guys pick him over Usyk or Fury? I certainly wouldn't pick him over Fury. Usyk, I mean, could he get to him down the stretch? I certainly expect Joyce to be soundly outboxed by Usyk. And Usyk has shown stamina late. But I don't know. I'll probably have to pick Usyk over Joyce too. But I think, look, Joyce would have a chance in both fights. Maybe his jab could give Fury some issues, his work rate. But ultimately, I'd probably pick both of them over him, you know? If he was to fight for a vacant title against one of the next-gen fighters, I'd give him a better shot. You see what I'm saying? So, but again, what age will he be by then? Will he be the same Joe Joyce as now? These are the questions. So, yeah, I may not include Joyce, but I would say top 3 guys most likely to be a world champion in the future. I'm going to say Jared Anderson. I'm going to say Bakatir Jalilov. And I'm going to say Filip Hrgović. Those are the guys. Those are the 3 guys who I think are most likely to pick up a version of a world title at some point in the future. Jalilov, Anderson, and Hrgović. The other guys may well do so as well. When I say a version, I mean a full version of a heavyweight title, not a WBA regular like Dubois currently has, a full version. Those are the 3 guys I would personally put my money on picking up a version of the world title in the not too distant future. Anyway, been a long video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I know there are going to be certain heavyweights that I didn't include on the list, but I can't include every single heavyweight prospect in the world, right? I may do a revised video later on in the future to include different heavyweights who I haven't come across yet. But these are the 12 guys that I'm focusing on at the moment. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, I'm out. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and it's 100% censorship-free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.